Hi everyone, Sweatany Suit Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Young Fathers album, Heavy Heavy. This is a brand new LP from Scottish experimental rap, art pop, and lo-fi trio Young Fathers, back with their fourth album to date. I have been covering these guys since their early tape EPs at the front end of the 2010s. It's been awesome to hear their progression since, even if every commercial album they've dropped over the years hasn't blown me away. For example, I thought their previous LP, Cocoa Sugar, lacked some of the rawness and thrills of their initial releases, which I think in a way Heavy Heavy is starting to recapture. Seems like the trio is hitting a balance this time around, giving fans the texturally creative sonics that made Young Fathers so interesting to begin with, and crafting with that songs that have these really grand, far-reaching builds of instrumentation that are really easy to get lost in, especially with many of the sounds in these mixes bleeding into each other so aggressively. Even though on the surface it sounds so grimy and chaotic, the beauty and grand instrumentation still comes across as really cinematic. Not to mention this LP brings a slight and interesting stylistic change for Young Fathers to the table, as many of the grooves and vocal lines on this LP have a distinctly West African feel to them. This has been the case for a lot of the trio's previous material, but I would say they're leaning into that sound, into that influence harder than ever now, and doing it in a really wild and eccentric way. Take the opening track Rice, for example, with its fuzzy bass and dusty loops progressively building into these hype chants. These hands can heal, these hands can heal, which is orbited by these pounding snares and ghostly layers of distant vocal harmonies. It's just a jubilee of sound, or maybe the musical equivalent in terms of its heat and growth of a wildfire spreading very rapidly. Then there's the following I Saw, which kicks off with a very hypnotic rocking guitar riff, and the boldest lead vocals on the entire LP, a lot of shouted proclamations, I want your shield, I want your weapon. There's a lot of content about physical defense, but also mental defense, not being susceptible to manipulation or nonsense, which of course builds into another display of just huge hard-hitting percussion and layers of group vocals, with mentions of brushing your teeth and washing your face, and the cleanliness in the context of this track takes on almost a religious sense. Then the tense loops and rhythms on drum, combined with the psychedelic touches of production here and there, has almost an Animal Collective quality to it, especially as some of the zany effects and background vocals going woo kind of enter the fold. But yeah, while the influence for this track is pretty apparent, it's also kind of great and brings me back to the visceral vibes that came off of Anco's earlier material. But Young Fathers takes, of course, a much different approach on the vocal end. I also get some Anco vibes from the driving hi-hats and rubbery bass on the track Sink or Swim later on the record too. The highlights on this record continue on to the song Geronimo. Love the low-key, almost ambient first leg of this track. The groove, I would say, has an old-school trip-hop quality to it as well. The build of vocals and instrumentation is absolutely heavenly. There's almost a new age feel to it. I'm not the most spiritual guy on the block, but I will say this track feels like it's speaking to my soul. Shoot Me Down contrasts this song greatly with some very unique and abrasive vocal samples. Lots of threatening shouts from guys who sound like they are about to open fire on someone, with some massive 808 hits and some slightly muddy drums. This eventually smooths out into a series of vocal passages and instrumentation that, again, has this religious experience type quality to it. It's like begging and hoping to survive under the threat of violence. There is very much a no weapon formed against me shall prosper type beat to it. The whole thing feels very literal for pretty obvious reasons, but simultaneously, mentions of being shot down could have a metaphorical quality about them as well. So yeah, there are lots of impressive tracks and moments throughout this record. If there's anything on this album I feel is lacking, very apparently so, it's some of the endings here, because a lot of the tracks on this thing undergo some really great gradual progressive builds, but sometimes that leads the trio into a space where they don't necessarily know how to end these tracks or give them a proper finale. There's Tell Somebody, which brings one of the largest, most reverb-soaked, and brightest displays of sound and layers on the entire record. It kind of goes up and up and up and up and up and doesn't really head anywhere from there, cuts off, dissipates, evaporates, just kind of dips. And while there are some previous cuts that undergo a similar progression, at least they had meatier instrumentals and felt like more of a song than just maybe a build across their runtime. Then there's the closing track, which I'm still wrapping my head around. I have no earthly idea as to what this is. We get all of these huge booming rhythms that aren't even really that locked into the tempo. They hit hard, they're loud, but they feel very sloppy, and the vocals Young Fathers layer on top of them are not really that great either, especially as the singing and shouting gets louder and more layered. There's not really a gratifying or gradual build to the track either. It sort of feels like they're just throwing out whatever the heck they want here, and as a result, the whole song ends in this utterly horrid cacophony. In my opinion, this leads to the most glaring misstep on the entire record, which really kind of speaks to this project's overall issue with not really knowing how to end things, because, yeah, the closing track here is just a gigantic faceplant in my view. Still, with that being said, even though the finishing cut on this thing is a massive disappointment, the rest of the record is fire. Really good, honestly. I think better than Young Fathers Last and one of their better projects overall. The songs on this thing are intense. Those gradual builds go over really well across the album. The performances are passionate. The production, instrumentation, and textures are on point too. And what a cool mix of influences across the record as well. The record is a little on the short side, but somehow doesn't really feel like it. And I'm really enjoying this project. I think it's a potentially good introduction for anybody new to the trio, as it has been a while since their last record, and it was most definitely worth the wait. Feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head, it's another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Young Fathers, forever.